Um, Hello, everybody, and thank you, Gilly, for the lovely introduction. It's not completely accurate that I'm the better half, but I'm most definitely the better looking one. So, what you see here is a picture from the first edition of 72-Hour Urban Action, which was and still is the world's first and best real-time architecture competition, where teams of designers and artists and residents come together and design and build projects in public space in 72 hours. So if before we were talking about the sky, we are talking about street level and how to do things really quickly. In reality, it started as 96-hour urban action project, but because of budget reasons, it was cut to 72, and it stayed like this ever since. It started in 2010 in Israel, in a suburb of Tel Aviv called Bat Yam, where the mayor wanted to build a big museum, and a big donor told him that we don't need another museum, and he should try to present art in the streets. So this was the framework where we did the first one. And from then he traveled to Germany, to Denmark, to Italy, to Russia, to Turkey, and to Malta for the last 2 years, and this year for the third time, and hopefully beginning of a new tradition. I will show you now a 1-minute recap of the first edition in 2010. So next year we will celebrate our 10th anniversary, and I will walk you through the process, how 72-hour urban action is done. Will be followed by Sam and Matea explaining what we did here, all in the goal to get to the interesting part, which is the discussion. So I'll try to keep it short. So, ready?
Things are changing, way of thinking is changing. Why does the architecture have to be so static? Everybody's like,
So the first edition was very successful, and a lot of people got into the idea, and we were invited to do it in many other places. And what you see here is a frame from a project we did in Italy, in Terni. It's a post-industrial city, like I think 1 hour away from Rome, where you see maybe one of the most important stages of the project, which is research. We start with, after we, together with our local partners, decided on an area, we talk to the residents, we try to understand what are the conflicts, what are the unrealized potential, who's doing what, who's not doing anything, and we try to map out as much as possible what is actually going on in the area that we're working in. So after we have this a stage where we gather the participants, usually with an open call. In the Maltese case, it's by invitation. We start with a performance. So we are framing this architectural and design activity as maybe as street theater. So it's the idea is that through this we try to make these issues that are in a lot of cases being left to professionals, and to open them up to the larger audience. So we sort of come in. It looks a little bit like occupation, you know, we're like marching in. But you have to remember that half of the people are from the place that we're working. So it's the idea is to also to create this to announce our presence in the beginning of the process. So this was the fun part, and then the difficult part starts. The research that we're doing each project that we're doing is between 1 and 2 years of research prior to the event. It's being sort of distilled into these mission briefs, which I will show later, but they are sort of bridging the gap between this long process before and the very short process of the actual event. The 72 hours begin when the team gets the mission. They get it by lottery usually, when there are more than one team. That was the case in Malta. And the teams immediately start to design in a sort of collaborative way. And they have to come up with a strategy within the first night. So we start afternoon, they eat each other's brains the entire night, and then the morning after they have to present a design. There's terrible noises, is it better? Yes. And the morning after they approve the project with a structural engineer, and they go on sourcing the material. We do a preparatory work of understanding what is available, who are the suppliers. We use recycling materials when possible, but not only. We also use pre-cycling methods, meaning that we also plan for what happens after. So what happens after the project is taken down, if it is, but also materials that are freely available on the market. After these were sourced, they're brought to the site, and the construction is actually happening where the sites are. So we're taking it out of these very closed areas for professionals only, and bringing them into the street, so everything becomes very transparent. I'm going to give you a few examples of what happened in other editions. This is in Israel, a site before that was just a leftover kind of space, publicly owned space between a road and the houses, that the team turned within 72 hours into a sort of a public park that remained. Moreover, this, you see, they planted the grass. The municipality didn't have the water ready for this when we finished. So the neighbor that was living, still is living behind, watered the grass every day for 2 weeks until the municipality came, and he called them that they should do it. So just to give you a little bit of a feeling of what is the impact on the people that are living where we work. Another example in Italy, where a team made a communal kitchen. They also, in the process of the project, went around. It's an immigrant working area, where they went around the neighborhood and collected recipes to be published on this sort of public kitchen. And when we open, part of the idea is to activate this with a sort of a neighborhood dinner. This is in Israel again, another take on waiting for the bus. A gate to the neighborhood that was designed and built in 72 hours with local craftsmen. I'm going to give you 2 examples of 2 missions, so you have a picture of how it looks. So this is one page of the mission, but you can see here that the missions that we provide, like the mission here was to provide the tower's residents with the high quality inviting public spaces, is very vague. We point at where the problem is, but we don't say you should make a playground or a tunnel, or we don't give a function. In this case, it's a tower. It's a tall building that's in Israel, designed as an office building and used by the government to house elderly immigrants. So the tower was an office building. There are no public or shared spaces, so the 400 residents, elderly residents of the tower, were using the sidewalk around the tower as their public space. So we decided that the mission should be to actually design this as their public space. So the team applied very quick strategies and many different directions. So one is very quickly making the 3 benches was set. So imagine these 3 benches are serving 400 people. The first thing they did is just made them connected them in a sort of into a sort of like a communal sitting area, which was immediately used, which is another very I would say nice feature of the project, that it's immediately used by the people who we are targeting. They also made this chandelier out of plastic bottles that I don't like, but they did it. And then they also used 2 empty floors of the tower to create instant shading with standard materials that we have that are used usually for agriculture in Israel. And the same team also developed this bench that can that slides along the wall next to the building to follow the shade the building is making. And hello, 1, 2. So this is one good example. Another interesting example is in Stuttgart in Germany, where we worked after. You can see in part of the street that residents blocked, because in front of, what you don't see is that in front of this there is a huge tango club. So we have one group of artists, hippies, living here with children playing on the street, and on the other hand, in front of it, people coming with their big SUVs and big cars trying to get as close as possible to the entrance. And these 2 groups of people were very judgmental and critical of one another, and it was a continuous fight. And the mission, we phrase it as create a non-judgmental courtyard. And the team there dismantled the temporary closure of the street that the resident made. They made it into actually the benches made out of this bike parking that you see. And they created this platform that serves both groups, also prevents the parking. And this is an example of a project that stayed. Not all of what we do stay. This stayed, and when the municipality had to take it out because they needed to renovate the sewage system, the residents put it back, just to give you an example of how things can get adopted. So what's nice about, well, a lot of things are nice about what we do, but when it works immediately, and when it works, we can keep it, and there are ways to do it. And I think the Maltese example that you will see soon is one, and I hope that we will give another good example this year. So I will give the pleasure of standing here and waving hands to Matea and Sam, who will tell you about the experience from last year of working here in Beer Zebuja.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, hello. I think I'm okay. So thank you, Gilly and Karen, for the introduction and for the opportunity to work with 72-hour Urban Action project last year in Beer Zebuja, and also to Design for the City, who were the collaborators for this project. Also, thank you to Malta Design Week for making this possible. I will see if this will work. Okay, so when we first met Gilly and Karen, we introduced ourselves with this photo. The photo shows one of our very first experiences with public space in Beer Zebuja. Fast forward 20 years from then, and we found ourselves in the same spot, yet we weren't the 2 of us alone. We were with 10 other participants who we're going to spend the next 72 hours working with. It was the first day when they came and we met them, and it felt that it was an important part that we took a photo, recreated the photo, the same space. It was meaningful, I think, at the start of our project. Then we went to the site.
So this is what the site looks like from one end, where parks are taking up most of the space. It's an abandoned alleyway. And then from the other side, yes, so you have kind of this interesting framing of the Freeport, also maybe a glimpse into everyday life in Mirza Abuja, but it's an abandoned alleyway that essentially no one took ownership of, and our brief was to take it and transform it and give something better back to the community.
The space was an abandoned alleyway which was between a residential building on one side and the historic site on the other side. It faced the sea on one end and an industrial site and further residential buildings on the other side. And as someone said, we had to encourage people to start using the space again. And we had to do that in 72 hours, which is quite a task and start to think about it.
So this is a video that will be playing of the whole project. So immediately the next day we headed down and met again with all the other participants, and Gili and Karam showed up with these orange and white overalls that we are supposed to wear all throughout the workshop. So immediately design phase kicked in.
We started analyzing the site, seeing the pedestrian flow and traffic flow. We started doing drawings of the site. But most of all, we started to speak with the locals, getting their view of the space, why they don't use the space, and maybe what there could be better in the space.
So maybe also an interesting point taken at project management stage was to work as much as we could with locals, not only for supplies, because that made it easier to avoid transport, but also to involve them directly in any way we could as part of the project. And here I really found it meaningful that a local gave us for free actually his boat that ended up actually being one of the main elements of the whole project.
I think the allure of this project was that we had foreigners and locals working together, and the mix of ideas really came through. The locals, we could go in direct contact with the people because we know the language, and foreigners brought in new ideas, and so the mix really came through on the project.
Also having the guidance of an architect, which helped us through all the challenges that we, of course, didn't have time to fully think of from before.
Yeah, I think for us, we had two phases in this project, the design phase and the building phase. In the design phase, we had to come up with a mission statement that Karim explained before, and in the building phase, we actually had to realize our design. And the building part was the most exciting part because you actually get to build what you first imagine. But with it comes a stressful part where all the problems that you didn't foresee before will actually arise. And we had a lot of problems during our project, but we managed to get through with the help of locals. So yeah.
So in the end, even our uncle stepped in with his machinery, which had a lot to speed up and carry through this project in 72 hours. And even locals stopping by helping us shovel rubble around, and so it was quite an experience. And seeing all of the locals, pitch in, give a hand to rehabilitate this public space, it was such an amazing experience.
At first all of us had roles as participants, but eventually these roles just vanished and everyone was doing what was necessary. And I think what really kept us going was 4 days itself. Designing and building something is really difficult, but what really kept us going, I think, was the adrenaline that we didn't have time to question ourselves what we know and what we don't know, but we just did whatever was necessary, and we were learning by doing all the time. In fact, my role in the beginning was community outreach, but at a point I found myself picking up a shovel and moving loads of rubbles, which a few hours before I had to go to the quarry with my uncle to get truckloads to the site. So that's all it took, basically, to learn something new and do something new.
Yes, so in the last day, all hands on deck, everyone was rushing to get it done. And there was still a lot of work to be done here we're drilling holes in metal, which we had spent a full night breaking drill bits in. So yeah. Yeah, the last stages, no one is really thinking. There was kind of this unspoken communication going on.
Everyone knew what
somehow
he had
knew
to do somehow, but
what they had to do. Something magical, was happening. Everyone, so we could finish this project in time, and finally managed to even suspend the boat right in time. Of course, with some help from machinery, to suspend the boat in midair.
So here we're looking at the boat being suspended, was the most intense. We were stressful at the time, but we were so very exhausted with all the work that we had done that we didn't really feel that stress anymore. So we just needed to get all the stuff done, and yeah, it finally got up.
And at the end of the day, like apart from the overexhaustion and all the fun that you have, it's also goes beyond just building the project. It's part of making relationships within the community and also between yourselves. I think only in such scenarios can such amazing friends be made in such a short time. So it was really an amazing experience overall. So this is the finalized project, and is us having fun in the end.
We were still smiling at the end. I think it was with the overexhaustion, but yet we still had that happiness that we actually made it through
Managed
the
to
70.
get the boat up in the air.
And
So.
through the 72 hours. So yeah, it was.
Yeah.
This is.
So this, then
sorry.
again, we, along with the building of the project, we had a launch event for the community, and we found this really important, so as to pass on kind of the project to the rest of the community. We had an evening, we invited all the community to come in, had drinks, had local singers sing songs about the sea. And this was a way of ceremony,
back,
passing on this public space that we had changed in the last 72 hours of the community. So this is what the project finally looked like. We wanted to retain the primary functions of the space as a passage, but also enhance it, as we wanted people to be pulled in and use the space. And also maybe because this was one of the first projects of its kind in Birza Buja, wanted to give it kind of be imaginative and show people what can be done with public space. So maybe the boat there gives kind of a surreal setting, a floating boat, which also emphasizes the connection of Birza Buja with the sea, which also lights up at night, also kind of a problem of a previous problem where there was no light in public space, and so at night people didn't feel very welcome to use it. So we incorporated light to make the space more inviting, and yeah, the community really loved it, and this nice shot. And the community really loved it. The fact that not only had we taken care of the space, but had given it back with something more. So they really appreciated that and took it as their own in the end.
So this year we're also working with 72 Hour Urban Action in Birza Buja. We have another mission area, yet it's still linked directly to the last year's project via a coastal road. So what we found different with this year's site from last year was the fact that last year we didn't have users which use the site, whereas this year we have a site which is functioning for users.
It's directly implanted between the community, and maybe has two major communities that actively use it. You have the fishermen from one side that use an unofficial boatyard on one part, and the residents, which some of them are still from around Malta and come to Birza Buja for the summer holidays, and even other flats that are being rented out for foreigners. But still, there's this public space that is open, just has a couple of benches and some trees, but really that no one has no connection to and doesn't use very much. Whereas you have the other side of the boatyard where there is like territorial almost ownership, where the fishermen, by not having nowhere else as a space where they can use to have maintenance on their boats, they like kind of protect this area. So this year, as with last year's project, we want to like work closely with communities and maybe even provide a project that bridges the conflicts maybe between these existing communities. So exactly, this is another shot of the site showing maybe the contrast between the boatyard that also generates conflicts and the residents. And another shot of the empty public space where people just prefer to use the road up from the space rather than actually traverse that. So it's next year's challenge, and from the 9th to the 14th of October, we're going to be working again in Mirza Buja for the next edition of 72 Hours. Thank you for listening.
Sam and Matea for the sweet memories, both now and last year as well. I guess now is the opportunity to refer to some serious questions that we have about the format in general and about the format in Malta specifically. So we're joined here by Wendy. And yeah, I guess my first question would go directly to you. It's kind of like a two-part question. One is, what are the benefits, as you see them, from a project like this towards thinking about strategic planning and planning policy in Malta? What are the options? And secondly, what would be the difference between participation in such a project versus, for example, community participation in Malta in a festa? Because we know there is a lot of community organization and people do come together in different ways. So from your point of view, what would be the differences and the benefits or the disadvantages there?
I'll start with the second one. Take this one. Yeah. So I'll start with your second question. Yeah, we do see a lot of participation in festas and band clubs. I think somehow there's a lack of awareness that you can participate in creating space. It's like space was given to us. It was there, and unless you're an architecture student, somehow you don't believe that you can change it for yourself to the better, maybe to make it work better for yourself or for the people around you. You know, we kind of accept it as a static factor of our lives. So I think we really have to make a push to harness this energy that goes into things like festas and really, you know, move it into changing our space. Or, like, this is what you do. You actually physically change the space, but it could be, yeah, move that away. But it could be acknowledging, the energy goes into acknowledging that the space can be changed. The thinking, changing the mentality. So almost not necessarily even getting to changing it, although when we have more of these projects, I think we'll start believing that we can change space, that we can do something with it. Now, our planning process, to go back to your first question, does not help this, right? It tends to be rigid. It does not help one think, yes, I can change it ad hoc, you know, just I woke up in the morning, I think something better can be done. I form a team of people, we come up with a design and we change it. The planning system does not allow this. For example, I know that to carry out these projects, you apply for some sort of temporary art installation. But this is so much more, isn't it? It's so much more than a temporary art installation. It's something that will change the way that we use that piece of Malta. So why shouldn't there be a process whereby we can apply for this kind of urban participation, you know? The thing is that it takes long to change processes. But there's another side to that issue. I feel that we are not creative enough in using the processes we have. So if there is more of this kind of initiative, and if the powers that be, because let us not forget that, I mean, I'm a planner myself, but that does not make me a decision maker. Decisions are made by politicians. So in reality, the designers, the planners need to work with the politicians to really achieve what they would like. I think we collectively are visionaries, but politicians do believe that they have a vision for the country themselves. Now, how is one going to align that possibly? How is one going to influence the other? And trying not to create factions, because often, even as a planner, I find myself questioning maybe certain decisions. And again, let us not forget that even though I represent the planning authority and my colleagues like me, we have our own technical expertise, we have our own ideas about what space could be, but these are not always aligned to the whole hierarchy of power structures. So I would like to make a call for more of these projects to influence the mentality, to believe that we can change space, that it need not be this heavy-handed process, and to use the system in creative ways so that even the powers that be, the decision makers, they realize that there can be this light touch, really participatory approach to changing space.
Yeah, I agree. Hello. No, this is like a game.
Yeah.
Hello. I totally agree. We find through our experience that planning processes are kind of, they represent each other. They're very similar from place to place, at least in Europe, in the European context. And we very often come to the realization that, yeah, we need to kind of like hack the permit system to put our foot on the ground and create something on the ground, and then go back to the permit system and try and keep it and try to find maintenance for it and try to find ways for it to become more permanent. And sometimes it's enough that the thing proves its own concept, that things can be done quickly and can change a place radically. But sometimes also the process with the permit and with the planning authority locally is the most important political aspect of the project. As Karim said before, we work on each project for almost a year, building a network of local institutions, local actors, and people who would like to get involved, having a relationship with the planning authority and with the cultural institutions in the place, building a relationship with social and community clubs. And all of this is actually not happening in 72 hours because building trust between people takes a bit more time. Although having fun together for one weekend goes a long way as well. And maybe we can hear from Matea or from Samuel about how they perceive the differences between community organized in Malta, the way that they are usually organized, and the community kind of organization that 72 requires, and how you see the potential also being students in the university and organizing other events yourselves.
Hello. Okay. Yes.
Hello.
It's okay.
Okay. So maybe.
Have all of them working? Yes. Great.
Hello? Okay. Okay, so نحسب ده بس بيجي too close.
Sorry.
Okay. Hello. Okay. So maybe as I see it, locally or like with progress, maybe even the scale of Malta, given localities maybe have lost kind of their reason to exist within the global scale of things. So we live in such a well-connected world nowadays that maybe small physical localities are being lost because everyone is looking out there as a global village. So maybe a counterintuitive idea to that would be if there is so easy access and like it's so much easier nowadays to find people with the same interest and have access to knowledge and skill building, why shouldn't we invest then that onto a scale where it is much easier to have a significant impact, speaking small localities in Malta. And in that way, I think that's a powerful idea that community members can come together under the direction of creative professionals and have a significant impact on their small localities so they don't fade away in progress.
Hello. And I can mention the community itself, the changes that we saw from last year to this year. Last year we saw kind of, they were afraid to come and intervene in the space with us. It took a long time to convince them, listen, we're encouraging you to come and help us. This is your space, it's going to be used by you. Whereas this year, after we did the project and some time passed, and they were okay, listen, we can do a difference, we can start using or change space again and start using it again. This year, we have approached the community from beforehand, and we're actually currently meeting up people and talking to neighbors, talking to the fishermen club that are using currently the space. They're kind of more letting go and accepting that that they can have a say basically in this project. So these kind of projects I think help the community itself to kind of realize and I mean come and actually do something about their space, not just be passive and look at it and accept the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. So, wanted to how? Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to remind everybody that this is also an initiative by the Valletta Design Cluster. So this is not only citizens taking law into their own hands in a sort of like a Wild West kind of situation when everybody's doing what they want. But this project is also about creating new interfaces between the planning system and between the authority and the power structures that we all take for granted, that are too so much bigger than all of us, and just create a new interface where there can be new kind of dialogue, where this kind of motivation from the people that are living there and actually using the site and the people that are managing and taking decisions about how to change or not change and how to invest or not invest in public space, and to create another sort of dialogue that is not only about words and opinions, but it's about trying ideas, seeing if they work, and taking it as a sort of as a real iterative process that is not done in the heads of designers, but in reality itself. Together with people.
If I can say something, one thing that I've noticed from these projects is the level of trust, right? You have to trust someone that the space is going to be better, that you can continue using the space either as you have been, or if you want to change, that you can continue using it in a better way. And this is a big issue I think that we have to work on with our planning system. Somehow I feel that there is a lack of trust in planners, in decision makers, that is hindering the process. And it works both ways, because it can work bottom up, that someone who wants to carry out a change does not trust the decision maker to take a decision in favor of that change. But it works also top down, that the decision maker stops trusting that the people who want to make a change are acting in the best interest. So there's a lot of cynicism, even on the top tiers of decision making, which is hindering the process, because it does not help either way. It does not help more of these projects being accepted, and it fuels this vicious cycle, which is I think, a big problem. I'm sure it's not only this country, but I feel it at the authority, at least.
Yeah, and I don't think that we mean, a lot of the aspects of this project are very nice, and they try and prove points that are very beautiful to try and prove. But of course the reality sets in after 72 hours of shared living experience, and then it's not always nice. It's not always something that gets to stay. Not every member of the community is happy with having had us outside of their house 24 hours a day for 72 hours straight, and not all the interests of the local neighbors are being served. I mean, even here in Bizabuja, one of the things we had to consider is to not create seating in our installation, because it was a very direct request coming from a neighbor. But this is exactly what the kind of experimental open format allows. It allows for immediate feedback, and it allows for the designer to have a direct communication with the neighbor. I don't know how we're doing for time, and I don't know how we're doing for people's staying awake. But if...
On that note, if we could invite Carl and Dimitri to the podium and invite the audience to ask any questions from this point onwards.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
This is Louise, who's organizing the Malta Design Week together with Chris, who's there somewhere. And last night and also tonight we've seen extreme contradictions within the content that are presented. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about why?
Well, the point of design dialogues is to open up discussions, and that wouldn't happen if everybody had the same opinion, and that's why we kind of invite. We've included some slightly controversial topics, but we always offer people the opportunity to have their say about these topics. So we hope people will join in the discussions in a kind of even, balanced way, and then maybe we can all kind of learn from each other's point of view afterwards.
Great. For me, it already worked. So I will stop moderating now and invite our colleagues for tonight. We can all stand together. We stand together at the Malta Design Week. So that you can see the beautiful chairs. Any questions? We have past participants, I think, somewhere here in the audience from last year, and maybe, hello, maybe they have questions. I have a question then. So we heard a lot about tall buildings and tall buildings in Malta. So do you think that's always the correct way of action in any given case, or what are the perfect conditions for a tall building and what are the worst conditions for a tall building in Malta?
There's no easy answer for that. I mean, I think the thing they do well, they concentrate space in a certain area, right? So that can be good and bad. I think they're a good solution when you want to localize that so you can preserve green spaces and less dense space elsewhere in the most simplistic way. And there can be environmental impacts too. Obviously, they concentrate people, so you share. Heating and cooling becomes more efficient, transportation becomes more efficient, all of those kind of things can be beneficial, but again, only if part of a larger, broader, well thought out planning structure. So, no, they're not always the right solution. But on the other side, they can be harmless in a place where you don't need them. So the building in Gothenburg, for instance, you don't need an 80-story building there. You could easily build slightly more sparsely into 20 stories or whatever and probably get this even greater return. But I think if it's well planned out, even if it's not necessary, it's not harmful. And if someone wants to make a symbol that's tall, I think if well planned out, it's harmless as well.
Yeah, I mean, what I might add is that as long as the public gets something back, you know, so I mean the whole 72-hour projects, they're always public spaces, creation of public amenities, you know, public usable areas, and same with tall buildings. I mean the best thing with tall buildings is that you're supposed to leave a lot of open space. So assuming that happens and the tall building itself incorporates some sort of public benefit, then I think it's great.
Can I follow up? Sorry, I'm hogging the conversation. How about public participation? Because we've heard from you also that it's architecture and engineering should go together, and that there's very logical reasons for it to go together, but we haven't heard public opinion going into the design or engineering process.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there should be public debate, but at the same time, I personally think this discussion should happen ahead of time in terms of informing a good plan, right? So that the debate on individual buildings becomes less intense. People have already had a general agreement on we will like and should have tall buildings here, and that can be debated hotly. But rather than it devolving into every single one being opposed and having different contingencies, that debate should happen, but I think it should happen before and less based on a specific building. But obviously there should be some debate at the end. So the public should inform the political and planning debate ahead of time.
So I think what we are trying to do, one of the things that we are trying to do is to open up the possibilities for people to actually react to design and planning, because I think that in a lot of cases people realize too late what is actually being proposed, and that's one problem. And the other problem is that a lot of people also at that stage don't understand how this relates to their own life. So what we're doing, I think, with performing architecture in the street is actually making it, opening it up to people who were not versed in reading plans or to understand how planning processes are going. And basically I heard it I'm stealing it from another person, but it's about the right to imagine. Who has the right to imagine the future? Who has the right to imagine how things will look? And I think that this is a very who has access, correct? Yeah.
We have a few questions in the audience.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Planning Authority for supporting these types of events. It's a recent development, I mean, perhaps the last 2 years, where it started getting more involved in sponsoring design events, design exhibitions, and these types of things. I think it's very positive that the Planning Authority is being more responsive to to design and more aware of the need for good design in this country. I'd like to pick up on a couple of points that Carl mentioned in his presentation. One of them is one of my pet hates, actually, the misconception about our high urban density. It's actually not high. It's the population density that's very high, but the urban densities are actually low. And this is because of the urban sprawl that we had in the 1980s, the 88 with the temporary provision schemes, that was further consolidated with the local plans. But our urban density is actually 4,400 people per square kilometer. If you take Angel Islington, the N1 postcode in London, which is one of the best postcodes in the UK, the average population density is 11,000. So it's a fallacy that we keep telling ourselves that our densities are too high, which is not the case. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go for high-rise, although I'm not against that. But we need to also start looking at urban densities rather than building heights to start addressing our issues. You also mentioned the master plan for the Parcherville area, which the Planning Authority had done. And I'll also I joined this to the second debate, the issue of public participation. When the Planning Authority published that master plan, the feedback, as most of you know, wasn't very positive. But my disappointment is that because the feedback wasn't positive, the process stopped, and they didn't take on. The Planning Authority didn't take on the response, which was in good faith. I mean, I'm assuming most of it was in good faith, to better the plan. So go back to the drawing board and republish it, and taking on board and involve people even in workshops or meetings to work on improving the plan. The actual idea of having a master plan is very positive, and it's disappointing that the Planning Authority kind of backed down from what could have been a very good outcome for the country and something that have been repeated for other areas. You also mentioned the issue of building regulation, which is another issue I'm working on. Some of you know I'm on the Chamber of Architects and Civil Engineers. I'm actually focused on building regulation at the moment. The government is going to be announcing something very positive next week. I'm not going to announce it here, but I think it's going to transform the role also of architects and civil engineers. It will take some time, but it is very positive, and I think it also will take off a lot of pressure from the Planning Authority at the moment, because the Planning Authority is basically serving rather than for planning, but it has been given the role of controlling buildings, the way they're built and the way they're designed, which is not its role. The role of the Planning Authority should be public space, land use, and issues of transport and these things, which unfortunately are not taking their primary role. Not taking precedence because it is being burdened with issues of building regulation, which is not its place.
It's my turn now. Hello? Yeah. So I agree with all you said, Andre, and I think about the master plan specifically. Design in general, I mean, we're all designers. It's not a straight line. You don't start and you draw a straight line and you get to the finish. It's a lot of iterations, and you keep going back and forth, and sometimes it's one step forward, three back, and the same with the master plan. I think the biggest error, I would say, in that master plan was that we just received the final finished product, and it was like, from nothing to a sort of, this is it. Whereas design, I think, should be more engaging, so what Dimitri said during the design of Burj, like the client was sitting in the design process, participating, influencing the design, shaping the design, so to speak. So I think that's the biggest error, that we have to be there during the process and come up with a final solution rather than get a solution and then we comment about it. Because if we have already commented during those months of preparation, hopefully, it will be a solution which everyone is aware of already, and it's not like a big shock. Like on one big day, we have like a master plan. And it's great news about the regulations office, which is, you're still keeping us curious, but that's fine. Yeah, I mean, obviously we are architects and engineers, and we cannot serve both roles simultaneously. So some people have to focus on one, and this applies also to the bodies, you know, the regulating bodies. So very positive.
I think I have to say something, right? Let's not forget that there are different levels of participation. So when you're mentioning the Burj, the participation was with the client. So in the Portugal master plan, I'm sure that there was I wasn't involved in the process, but there must have been participation with stakeholders, maybe the owners of the land, and so on. What we are questioning here, I feel, in this forum, is participation with other stakeholders, like the people using the space, or the residents. But those are two very different levels of participation, and I don't think one should mix them up. I wholly agree with a call for more legitimate participation by members of the public. In fact, I think more can be done to improve the methodologies we use, more can be done to improve the systems of representation, maybe not necessarily changing the ethos of it, but more on a grassroots level. So you can use better technologies, you can use better methods of dialogue. So there are many nuances in this. It's not a 1 or a 0. It's not a binary system. It's not a you have a master plan which wasn't participatory or not. Because if we look at it closely, there was the same level of participation that there was at the Burj. Okay, so the cases are very, very similar in that respect. What we are saying is that there wasn't a more grassroots participation. Now, what can we do to change that? Can we use perception mapping? Can we use performance? What are the methods that we can introduce in our planning system within the current legal system to have better dialogue, to have better communication, and to include more people than it currently attracts? Because one thing my pet hate is calling people who participate in the planning system objectors. It is a pet hate for me, because why should I be branded as this negative person simply because I want to state my views? So I think we really should make a call for, yes, let's introduce new systems. Let us be creative about how we dialogue with the planners and with the officers and with the decision makers.
I know the audience would like to say a few questions, and we're running very over time. So I'm going to ask if anybody has any quick questions from the audience and you'd like to join in. Yes?
Desirability of not having load-bearing walls in skyscrapers for the purpose of having that flexibility. Insofar as these skyscrapers will last for a long time and many different people will be in there at any given time and many different uses, etc., I'm wondering whether you can offer examples of any any design that has been done to allow for kind of flexibility or expressiveness. For example, Hundertwasser, who didn't build skyscrapers, but he built, he designed buildings, and he had this fanciful idea that any resident was allowed to paint or tile around his window as far as the arm could reach, right? So I don't know if you deal at all with interiors, the public space within the buildings, but if you have any examples of that kind of, yeah.
Believe it or not, I think the best example of that is your typical corporate office space, because we typically design corporate office buildings shell and core, and the interiors are left completely raw, and then the individuals fit them out. Okay. In the U.S., it's very common in tall buildings that residences are sold the same way. They're raw space with allowances to run public stuff, and people can fit them out and change them. They can buy the one next door and combine them. I mean, I spent some time in Chicago, all the buildings, residential buildings, 20, 40 stories, they're all like that. They're typically, the spans are maybe 8 to 9 meters clear, and so the partition walls are just simple metal or wood stud walls or drywall that you can take it out easily. And that's coming out of the fact that corporate tenants tend to lease and want to completely do them myself. I find in the UK, there's all of the developments, the units are completely designed, which I find personally sort of off-putting. I think if I were going to buy a specific unit, I'd want to do that myself, but that's the way it's done. And nevertheless, it's very rare that we have load-bearing partitions that can't really move around. It tends to be big, relatively large open spans that create areas under yourself. So it's not uncommon. But what is uncommon is at the high end, having raw, at least in the UK, having this raw space that no one can change. I don't think there's anything for it. It's just not the one.
Thank you.